When you hear the phrase witness protection program, it may bring to mind scenes from a Hollywood mafia movie. But how many of you know much about this highly secretive, important, and sometimes controversial service, officially known as the Witness Security Program, or WITSEC? From its beginnings in the mid-1960s to the present day, over 18,000 people, men, women, and children, have been enrolled in WITSEC. While this number may sound high, it's important to realize that in reality, it's rare in the criminal justice system that such protection is offered. Operated by the U.S. Marshal Service, the program has gone through various changes through the years. It's had its successes and failures, and has seen its share of controversy to be sure. However, WITSEC is still considered to be a valuable tool by federal law enforcement, and an important piece in facilitating prosecution of criminals when appropriate. In 1961, an attorney named Gerald Schur was working for the Department of Justice in the area of organized crime. He was working with a witness, a man who owned a New York City trucking company. This man claimed that a local mobster named Johnny Sonny Francesi was demanding that he turn over half the profits of his business. He said Sonny's henchmen had vandalized his trucks and beaten him unconscious with a baseball bat. Schur wanted him to testify against Francesi, but of course, the man was more than reluctant to do so. In his mind, half his profits gone were better than being dead. Schur thought there had to be a way to get witnesses to testify against the mob. It was then that it occurred to him that the law enforcement had to have a way that if a guy was in danger because of his testimony, then they'd have to be able to get him out of there quickly. This led to the creation of the WITSEC program under Title V of the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970, which allowed the Attorney General to provide relocation and protection of a witness or a potential witness of the government in an official proceeding concerning organized crime or other serious offenses. By some estimates, the U.S. government currently spends about $10 million a year on this program. It's a large number, for sure, but witnesses with an information so damning that their lives are in jeopardy make very strong cases. Trials involving WITSEC, witnesses have an 89% conviction rate. Organized crime in New York, Chicago, and Boston continued to be very active throughout the 70s and in the 1980s. WITSEC is credited with breaking up some of the largest crime syndicates in all those cities. One high-profile case involved Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. He was a hitman who rose through the ranks in the Colombo and Gambino crime families in New York. When he and a mob kingpin, John Gotti, were arrested at their Little Italy social club in 1986, Gravano cut a deal with the feds and testified in a court against Gotti. At the time, Gravano was the highest-ranking member in the mafia to break his blood oath and turn to state's evidence. His testimony led to a wave of Cosa Nostra members, which is a nickname in the mafia for our thing, becoming witnesses to the government in exchange for reduced sentences or entry into witness protection. This left the five families of New York organized crime, the Gambino, Bonanno, Genovese, Lucchese, and Colombo families, incredibly weakened, though they do still exist in some form today. These days, the Witness Protection Program is just as likely used in cases involving drugs, terrorism, and other major crimes. The program is completely voluntary. Participants can leave anytime they want to, although it's highly discouraged from the Department of Justice. They proudly say that no WITSEC participant following the guidelines has been harmed or killed while under the U.S. Marshal protection. Note that they say, follow the guidelines. Sometimes people do leave the program or don't follow the rules, and sometimes they get killed. Daniel Apollo was the first WITSEC witness to be murdered. He went back home against advice of the marshals after his brother's funeral, and when he turned the doorknob, it blew up in his face. The mob got their retribution. Even when everything goes as it should, however, it's not an easy life. Imagine leaving everyone and everything you knew behind. And you go where they tell you. You don't get to pick your new location. Sometimes spouses, children, and even parents and siblings are also relocated. But often it's just an individual or the immediate family. One man asked that his mistress be relocated with him, and not his wife. At least 95% of relocated witnesses are guilty of some type of wrongdoing themselves and are cooperating to avoid prosecution themselves. And contrary to what some may think, the program is no big payday either. The feds usually set witnesses up in their new lives and give them a certain amount of time to get on their feet and get a job. When children are involved, it's especially difficult. The mobster Henry Hill, whose story was the inspiration of the Hollywood movie Goodfellas, had 2 children with his wife Karen. After testifying for the feds, the family entered WITSEC. These children, Greg and Gina Hill, described the day in 1980 when the FBI told them they'd never go home or see their friends or extended family again. Greg was 13, Gina 11. They didn't want to go, but were told that their lives were in danger and that the mafia may kill one of them to help draw Henry out. So they went. As it turned out, Henry could never keep his mouth shut or stop drinking and doing the drugs. The family was always on the move, and the children lived very unstable lifestyles. Often innocent family members are the victims. A landmark case that led sweeping changes and a 1984 amendment to the Organized Crime Control Act was initiated when Thomas Leonard went public with an alarming story. He was the divorced father of 3 children. He had shared custody with his wife, now ex-wife. She happened to remarry someone in the protective government service, and Leonard was denied visitation with his kids because revealing their new identities and location would put their stepfather at risk. He sued in family court and was awarded full custody. WITSEC officials still refused to disclose their location. The negative publicity that was generated resulted in the amendment to WITSEC protocol, which dealt with joint custody issues and minor children. So while witness protection hasn't been free from controversy or problems, it is still a useful program for the government. Today, the witnesses in WITSEC are just as likely or more likely to be involved with gangs or drugs as with organized crime. In an NPR interview, U.S. Marshal Joe Pianessa says the charge comes with new challenges. Often the people they're dealing with are young. Protecting an 18-year-old drug dealer is a far cry from relocating a middle-aged mobster. Their ability to follow rules, to maintain their false identities, and to break all ties with their old lives, and to grasp the threat to their lives is far less developed at this young age. Also, technology in the modern age has made the witness protection program that much more challenging. Google has made disappearing into a new life tougher. Still, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Justice maintains that no one who's followed the rules has been killed. So there is not too much to know about the necessarily secretive witness protection program, as WITSEC is often called. It is credited in large part to bringing down organized crime in the 1980s and has continued to be a valuable tool today in the fight against drug trafficking and gang violence. Entering into witness protection is not an easy way of life, but sometimes it may be the only way to stay alive. And while it's true that witness protection is rarely offered in the criminal justice system, you never know. You might just be borrowing that cup of sugar next door from a hitman.